other restrictions on physical movement. With restrictions and containment measures being localized and targeted, that's what I was alluding to. With restrictions and containment measures being localized and targeted, businesses and households are learning to adopt. Consequently, the dent to aggregate demand is expected to be moderate in comparison to a year ago. Reports suggest that the disruption in manufacturing units so far is minimal. Consumption demand is holding up, with sales of consumer goods rising in double digits in January to March, and average daily electricity generation up by 40% year-on-year in the month of April. Rail freight has registered growth of over 76% year-on-year in April. Toll collections in April suggest that mobility has declined, but quite unlike the abrupt halt in mobility during April last year. Registration of automobiles in April 21 has shown some moderation compared to March. The tractor segment, however, continues its robust pace. The Purchasing Managers Index, that is PMI for manufacturing, continues in expansion mode at 55.5 in April compared to 55.4 in the preceding month, that is March. Overall, the high-frequency indicators are emitting mixed signals. The RBI will closely and continuously monitor all incoming data to assess on a real-time basis the impact of the second wave on macroeconomic and financial conditions. CPI inflation eased up to 5.5% in March 21 from 5% in February, on the back of a pickup in food as well as fuel inflation, while core inflation remained elevated. High-frequency food prices data for April 21 from the Department of Consumer Affairs, Government of India, suggests further softening of prices of cereals and key vegetables, while price pressures in pulses and edible oils remain. Price of petrol and diesel registered some moderation in April. Manufacturing and services PMIs, along with rising WPI inflation, show a persistence of input price pressures. The May 12 release of National Statistics Office will throw more light on inflation developments. Going forward, a normal southwest monsoon as forecast by the IMD should help contain food price pressures, especially in cereals and pulses. The buildup in input price pressures across sectors, driven in part by elevated global commodity prices, remain a concern. The inflation trajectory over the rest of the year will be shaped by the COVID-19 infections and the impact of localized containment measures on supply chains and logistics. But even at this time, in the run-up to the next MPC, when our teams are analyzing the various incoming data, and as I said, we are monitoring them on a real-time basis, we do not expect any broad deviation from the projections which we made in our April MPC, but you will have to wait for our MPC statement, which is due in the first week of June. In the external sector, India's merchandise exports and imports rose sharply in March of this year. For the year 2020-21 as a whole, the merchandise trade deficit shrank to US $98.6 billion from $161 billion US a year ago. Preliminary data released by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India, indicate that India's merchandise exports and imports continue to witness broad-based robust growth performance even in April 21. The current account balance, which had been recording surplus from January 2020 through September 2020, flipped and turned into slender deficit of 0.2% of GDP in third quarter of 2021. Foreign exchange reserves were at $588 billion US on 30th April 21. This gives us the confidence to deal with global spillovers. Domestic financial conditions remained easy on abundant surplus system liquidity. The average daily net liquidity absorption under the liquidity adjustment facility, that is LAF, was at rupees 5.8 lakh crore in April 21. The first auction of GSAP 1.0 conducted on 15th April 21 for a notified amount of rupees 25,000 crores elicited an enthusiastic response, as reflected in the bid cover ratio of 4.1. GSAP has generated softening bias in GSEC yields, which has continued since then. And as I have explained in the MPC statement, the GSAP is contributing to softening of GSEC yields, which in turn contributes to softening of the corporate bond yields and the private sector borrowing in the market. Given this positive response from the market, it has been decided that the second purchase of government securities for an aggregate amount of rupees 35,000 crore, I repeat, for an aggregate amount of rupees 35,000 crore under GSAP 1.0 will be conducted on 20th May, that is in about 2 weeks from now. With system liquidity assured, the RBI is now focusing on increasingly channelizing its liquidity operations to support growth impulses, especially at the grassroots level. Now I turn to the additional measures that we have proposed. In our fight against the second wave, alleviating any constraint from the financing side for all stakeholders, that is government, hospitals and dispensaries, pharmacies, vaccine, medicine manufacturers and importers, medical oxygen manufacturers and suppliers, private operators engaged in the critical healthcare supply chain, and above all, the common man who may be facing sudden spikes in health expenditure. All these require a comprehensive, targeted policy response. Small businesses and financial entities at the grassroots level are bearing the biggest brunt of the second wave of infections. Against this backdrop, and based on our continuing assessment of macroeconomic situation and financial market conditions, we propose to take further measures, which now I will enumerate. The first measure relates to term liquidity facility of rupees 50,000 crore to ease access to emergency health services, to boost provision of immediate liquidity for ramping up COVID-related healthcare infrastructure and services in the country.